Hi, I'm with Group 2, and for our symbol research assignment, we were assigned the Picture Communication Symbol System, better known as PCS. Group 2 consists of myself, Hannah Browder, Caitlin Crossdale, Abigail Ham, Carrie Reisenberg, and Megan Siebert. So a little bit of background on PCS. It was first developed by Mayer and Johnson and was published in 1980. In the beginning, it was used as a paper, printable device, so a very low-tech device. The symbols were in black and white. It had the thick lines. And, the black and white and the thick lines was primarily because the co-owner, Roxy Johnson, found it easier to copy and print the devices when it was made this way. So that's a little, interesting tidbit. But that kind of style, the thick lines, the highly contrasted images is kind of standard for picture communication now in the AAC world, which I think is very interesting. Anyways, later on in 1989, they partnered with Boardmaker, which is a program that has, basically this big library of picture symbols. So, speech language pathologists, other professionals, sometimes even, parents can go onto this website and create PCS systems for people, with complex communication needs or those who use an AAC system. Now in 2021, the PCS systems have grown immensely. You can use them on, a whole bunch of devices, basically anything that supports Boardmaker. So, whether it be a laptop, a desktop, your iPad, I think even some phones, I think it's Android, supports Boardmaker now. So you can even have, like a really tiny mobile AAC device if that's what someone wanted. But, they still offer the printed versions, the low-tech communication devices for those who, prefer not to use the high-tech devices that are offered now. One of the benefits of a PCS system is that it includes over 45,000 different symbols. So you really get a lot of variety and vocabulary within this system, which, opens the door for a lot of conversation, a lot of learning, a lot of opportunity for these users to communicate in a way that they may not be able to with, different systems, just because it really does have all that variety to offer. And, in my opinion, one of the best things about the PCS systems is how they have different types of picture designs based on who the user is and what their preferences is. So what we're looking at now on this slide is the classic design. So it has very thin lines on the outs, or it has very thick lines, lines on the outside. All the pictures are very, heavily lined. There's not really any shading. It's very, very clear for the user, and it's actually the most common style of PCS. It comes in, the colored like we're seeing here, but also comes in the classic black and white. Although this is used, across the lifespan with, children and adults, children really like this display system just because it is so cartoony and, a lot more, I guess, fun to look at than a different type of PCS system that we're going to look at later. So here are the other three types of PCS systems. So we have thin line, high contrast, and in context. The thin line is a very realistic set of pictures. Although they're still in cartoon form, you can see on here, like in comparison to the classic style, they have the very thin outlines on the picture. They use a lot more realistic and neutral colors. It's a lot more adult-esque. It's a lot more, a mature way of drawing a cartoon. And that's why it's really popular amongst teens and adults, is because it has that maturity behind it. And a lot of people really enjoy that. Then we have the high contrast, which is what you're seeing at the top. And this is actually what I think is the coolest one, because it's for people who have visual impairments or, cortical visual impairments. It has, the bright colors. It has the black background. It's super easy to see. It's minimal detail. So for people with these visual issues, it can be a really great way for them to still have access to communication. And then finally, the last form of PCS system that there is in context. Now, this is usually geared towards adults who have problems with communicating about daily living situations. So, like being in the car, going on a walk, going to the grocery store. So this provides them an in-context way to kind of talk about what they're going through. It's really comparable to the thin line style. If you look back to the thin line picture on the left, we can see, it has the thin outlines, it has the more realistic cartoons, which is why it's more geared toward adults.
We found 3 different studies looking at the iconicity of picture communication symbols. We will discuss each of these studies in detail on the following slides. The first research study was an analytic survey. The survey was conducted on rural Zulu children. The purpose of the study was to investigate the iconicity of selected picture communication symbols for rural Zulu 10-year-olds. It was designed to have researchers verbally give a Zulu label to the children, and then the children would mark the symbol they thought best depicted that label. Because this was an analytic survey, there were no independent or dependent variables. The results of this study show that the iconicity of selected PCS symbols was very low. This study also showed that when the children selected a symbol to match the label given to them verbally, many of them did not make maximum use of the information that was provided by the arrows in the symbols. So this could be an explanation of why there was low iconicity, since participants did not make use of these arrows. This also shows us that arrows in symbols may not improve iconicity, or that special training in the use of arrows might be needed. This shows us as clinicians and researchers that although PCS is widely used, the symbols are not entirely guessable for the population, and that the PCS symbols have a low percentage of being identified correctly on first exposure.
Okay, so the second research study was conducted in South Africa. The researchers wanted to find out how accurately can typically developing 6-year-old Afrikaans-speaking children identify picture communication symbols. They also wanted to know how accurately they can identify the symbols after a training session. So for this study, the independent variable, or the intervention that they were going to give the experimental group, was training in what the symbols mean. The dependent variable, or what they're measuring, was the percentage of accuracy in identifying the symbols. For the procedure, they had 46 participants split into control and experimental group. The test was given over 3 consecutive days. The first day, both groups took the same test. They were given a display with 16 picture communication symbols related to making a bed. The researcher would say the label in Afrikaans 3 times, and then the child would indicate with a marker which symbol the label corresponded to. For the pre-test on the first day, there were no significant differences found between the 2 groups, and the children were able to identify about 25 to 30% of the symbols with greater than 50% accuracy. On the second day, the control group was not given a training, and the experimental group was given training. So they were taught what each of the 16 symbols meant, and they went over that twice in that session. And then the third day, both groups took the same test again as they did the first time. And then they compared the results. And there were 2 main outcomes from this study. So the first is that they both showed a significant increase in the post-test compared to the pre-test. They think that the control group had increased accuracy just because of previous exposure from the first day. And then they also found that there was a significant difference between the groups. So the experimental group had significantly greater accuracy than the control group. They were able to identify 100% of the symbols with greater than 50% accuracy. So this study showed that even just after 1 session of training, there can be a significant increase in accuracy for typically developing children, which is what we're looking for. We want symbols that are easily learned. And then the other implication is that these symbols can be applicable across cultures, across languages, which is also what we're looking for in terms of iconicity.
The third study we looked at examined the iconicity of a 16 PCS symbol. The theme of this PCS board was on how to make a bed. The survey style study included 30 South African children who had mild intellectual disabilities and were regular AAC users. The authors found that the symbols in this study were iconic and could be manipulated, enhanced, and influenced by altering the context of that the PCS system was presented in. The contribution to AAC through this study was that the iconicity of PCS should not be determined by isolated symbols, but rather in relation to other symbols, and these symbols may be influenced depending on how they are presented.
Results of our iconicity continuum rated semi-truck, the noun, as much more transparent than either the descriptor or the verb, with hit being the most opaque, especially in comparison to the alternative options that were presented. And these ratings correspond to the results of our experiment that we got as well. 100% of our participants were able to correctly identify semi-truck, whereas 0% were able to correctly select hit. 90% of participants selected sock as an alternative to hit, with an additional 10% choosing crash. For the descriptor awful, results much more spread out, with 40% selecting the correct image of awful and another 40% selecting sick, with the additional participants choosing hurt or hot as well. Participant feedback that we got was varied. Some participants did say that the selections presented for awful they called ugly and were unattractive. Again, with awful, they chose option A, which was sick, because it looked like he ate something awful, so they were applying some more context to that situation. And for the verb hit, several of our participants stated that really any option made sense to them, and that made it hard to pinpoint which one was the correct answer. As for surprises, the specificity of the alternative options that were presented, so for semi-truck, it presented military truck, delivery truck, mail truck, really breaking those down was surprising to us, and how specific they got with options. And then for hit as well, having sock as an option, which is a not high frequency word, was surprising. Our results were consistent with previous research in that the majority of symbols had an accuracy of less than 50% without training. That corresponds to results found in the 2005 study by Bassett and Gallant. So benefits and drawbacks of the PCS system. It is available on high-tech or low-tech devices with a lot of different versions and variety too, such as high contrast, thin line, so it really can cater to the needs of the individual. It's fairly easy to program with 45,000 choices. It's also easy to train users on, and you can really choose how complex or simple the display needs to be for that individual. Drawbacks of it, though, are low iconicity. There are too many options in some cases, and then depending on the version you're using, whether that be high contrast, thin line, the original, some of those selections may not be appealing to adult users because they do look quite childish. And then in addition, the device they're using must support board maker. So there's some limitations there. And then we have our references.